Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is the 29th of August 2017, and this market report is brought to you by the Maestro way. This is the Maestro here, and I wanted to welcome you to my Steemit page, where if you go to my Steemit page, you'll notice that on occasion, when I'm able to, during the day, I will post a chart or two. It's real quick for me to do this, and you're going to notice that I posted earlier today a silver chart, a gold chart with a rare gap, the dollar chart where it is now printing. Earlier today, printed a 2.5-year low. The 10-year rate or yield, TNX is that ticker. The S&P and the NASDAQ chart and gap fills, and Bitcoin, and of course a 401k idea for you. So moving forward, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, along with the others, and we'll see those in a moment, gapped down pretty solidly actually. And you're going to notice that this gap right here that was created did fill within about an hour and a half after the open, and it's been rather flat ever since. What I want or would encourage you to watch is this downtrend resistance. I have no idea, I cannot predict the future, but it would make some sense that this line of resistance would be challenged. Now, there's one thing, in fact, that I'm noticing that I did not indicate in this chart, that I will do that literally with you watching, is the only overhead gap in the chart that is up in here. There is one overhead gap on the 30-minute view. From a one-day perspective, I would imagine, I haven't looked at it, but I would imagine sitting, there it is, sure enough, sitting just on the 50. The 50-day moving average has provided, once again, support. Of course, we're starting to see the 20-day roll over. We move on to basically one of my favorite charts to watch, and you'll remember yesterday I talked about this level being very, very important right here because of the 20-day, a descending 20-day moving average sitting right on a downtrend resistance, and of course the price action sitting right on the 200-day moving average. If we go to the 30-minute view, you can see that has yet to turn into support. You'll see literally it's still resistance, barely. This, I believe, the Russell is the chart to watch. If the Russell moves above this resistance, I would suspect you'll probably see that in the other indices. Moving on to the NASDAQ, and we'll go to the 30-minute view. Checking out the NASDAQ, you're going to notice again had a pretty solid gap down. This former gap that goes all the way back to the 21st, really about a week, did fill. This is why gaps are important to pay attention to, and this is frankly for me why I've turned them into this magenta color. Also, the gap down today filled as well. Let's now look and see how close we are to this major resistance. We'll go to the 1-hour view, and you can see touch, not quite, and you can see right here if it moves up, which right now these averages seem to indicate there's the potential. Here's the range you're going to be watching for resistance. We're going to move on now to the S&P chart, and again, once again, another gap. This gap all the way back to the 21st, a week ago. This gap did, in fact, fill. So we take that off. I'll take that off my chart. And of course, the gap down today from the previous close yesterday has also filled. Lots of gap fills. You notice there's only one overhead gap remaining on the S&P chart, and it is potentially going to run into this resistance. It'll be interesting to see once again if that resistance holds. Moving on to the bonds, I watched two basically. I watched the 10-year rate, and the 10-year rate is interesting. It didn't close a prior gap Sorry about that, using this free software here. This gap goes all the way back to the end of June, and it didn't close. It didn't fill. It just leaped right over it. Now, creating another gap, all right? Now, that gap has yet to fully fill, all right? You can see this, all right? So interesting action. In fact, I'll just move this up and you'll see what remains ultimately in this gap. I could even make an adjustment on the top end of this as well. Now we're going to move on to the 20-year ETF, TLT, and a couple of things of interest. Number one, it did gap up. Number two, that gap has yet to completely fill. You can see this here. Three, you'll notice that it is just above what really I thought was, on my chart, was a neckline for an inverse head and shoulders. You can see this pattern right here. Left shoulder, head, right shoulder, and you can see a pretty defined resistance that was broken, turned into support, and then failed, turned into resistance again. Currently, right now, the price action is sitting just above that neckline. In fact, if we go in very closely here, it may have turned into support. Look at that. Sure enough, this neckline may be support. May. Like to see, frankly, that gap fill. There are overhead gaps, of course, and you can see that here, and that overhead gap goes all the way back to looks like November of 2016. Next is the gold and silver ratio, and you're going to notice that there are lower highs in the gold and silver ratio. Okay, that is an indication, because of the relationship with gold and silver, an indication that gold and silver are obviously moving up. We've been watching that. You can see resistance here. We should be watching this. All of the trend support lines, all of them have ultimately failed, and they now become resistance. We'll move on to gold. And gold did peak at around, what, 1326 or so, and came back down. Well, what's interesting about the gold chart is something very rare happened, and you notice on my Steemit page, and I hope you'll notice, you'll look at that. But gold did something fairly rare. It gapped up. You typically don't see that, since gold, trades nearly 24/7. And interestingly enough, sure enough, it gapped up, and right now it's sitting just about at the top of that gap, And it's going to be interesting to see what gold does from here. Has made a very, very nice move. You have to wonder what this move here was. I'd read about 18 or 1.8 million ounces sold or something like that. But here's the question: who bought? For every sell, there's a buy. For every buy, there's a sell. And we know it's paper. We understand that. We'll move on to silver. And silver is very, very fascinating. If I go to the 1 week view, you'll notice I have a very difficult time determining what is considered a solid downtrend, especially from a long-term perspective. This just happens to be a weakness of mine. And if you want to place a few comments that might help me with that, I appreciate that. But you find the top of this high, of course, that was around 49, almost 50, right? And you certainly could have pulled that line at one time. Pardon me. You could have pulled that line from here and touched this point, but then you can see, okay, good, that fails, right? So then you can pull it up a little bit, and that failed. And now you pull it up here, and it's going to be interesting to see if that fails as well. Ultimately, I think what I'm trying to articulate to you is, not only is it difficult to determine, but also I think there's the real potential that silver is ready to move beyond. You can see this right here, right? Ready to move beyond this downward trend. In fact, I can't quite call it support. So we need to watch silver in the next day or two. I think it's going to be very, very telling. Moving on to the dollar chart, and again, free software program, sorry about that. The dollar chart, as you'll notice on my Steam It page here, created a 2.5-year low today, where this support line did not hold. It became resistance. And then I even posted, what's next? 86, 80, 87? Well, moving on then, looking at this, you'll see that now all of a sudden that resistance, well, that support that turned into resistance, now technically I actually have to turn that into support. So could have been an opportunity to blow out some stops, not sure. But again, once again, dollar does not look bullish whatsoever. Now you have a declining 50-day, but it will be interesting to see if the dollar could gain some traction. You might ultimately start to see maybe this 20-day moving average start to turn, flatten at least, or and then even turn north into the 50, which might, on a maybe short-term basis, might provide some impetus and support for the dollar moving, believe it or not, moving up. Bitcoin is the last chart I'd like to look at, and Bitcoin finally went through this double top that I had been talking about. You can see that right here. It's a rough double top, and did go up through it. Now, the question is where is it going? You can see this right here seems to be pointing up into the 8,500 range. And that's only based upon following former support, okay? Former support that became resistance, okay? But this goes well back to 2011, November 2011, where it was support, and then failed and it became resistance. And at this point, it's still resistance, but here's the question. Maybe that becomes, former resistance becomes the next target. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of cryptocurrency, only from I guess, a historical and practical and maybe even philosophical perspective. I understand that it could actually be helpful to bring about an awareness to all of the printing of fiat currencies, but and maybe even more awareness ultimately to gold and silver as strong backing for maybe potential currencies. I hear many say with cryptocurrencies that they can be good, they can be bad. My question ultimately would be this. With as much poverty in the entire world and with the kind of calamities that can occur around the world, how can we create a digital currency where everyone has the same access and buys into it? Now, not to become too conspiratorial here, but that brings up a lot of questions about A, a one world currency, B, digitalizing everyone and all of their assets. It is a concern. It is really a concern. And then the next question is this: what is Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin a governmental trial balloon? Apparently, I'm told that it's decentralized, private, and that's not the case. Another question would be, is the government watching this private currency, if you will, and using it as a trial balloon to create their own? So again, I think these are weighty issues, ladies and gentlemen, not conspiratorial issues, because I think it sure looks like the writing appears to be on the wall. Well, thank you again today for joining me here on the Market Report. I'd like to thank Greg for allowing me to do this. I also have been enjoying watching Trader of Futures with Ernie and his reports. Very philosophical young man, and I enjoy watching, and I hope you do. I hope you enjoy watching and listening to his comments and his analysis of markets. You can visit my page, of course, at just do a search up here in the Maestro way, and of course on my website, which is www.themaestroway.com. I have just below my latest interview, you'll notice there, if you plug your email address in here and submit, it's a free service that eventually I will use, where you will receive all of my charts and videos first. And my goal is to have 1,000 by the end of September. I might be nearing 100 at this time. So it's a very ambitious goal, and I'm hoping you can help with that. So ladies and gentlemen, again, I'm really pleased that you allow me to be here and to listen to my perspective. Some of you are not sure who I am. I'm a conductor, a music teacher, an educator, and this happens to be a hobby of mine. It turned into a hobby after losing 30% of my retirement back in 2008 to 2009. And I decided I didn't want to be a victim anymore. I wanted to be proactive and take as many and as much matters in my hands as I could possibly do. And that you may be the same. You may be in the same boat. I'm just a middle-class citizen. I'm a Gen Xer, and I have a lot of concerns about the future of our country, mainly culturally, but also financially. Thank you again, folks, and have a fantastic day. I'll talk to you soon.